Welcome to episode number 324 of Destination Linux. Destination Linux is a video podcast from the Tux Digital Network. If you're new to the show, Destination Linux is a podcast perfect for all experience levels. Whether you're brand new to open source or a guru of sudo, this is the show for you. My name is Ryan.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Jill.
And on this week's episode, we discuss the final push for Wayland adoption. Is it finally here? Is it going to happen? Then we discuss Pipewire in the future of Linux audio. Plus, we have our tips, tricks, and software picks. All of this coming up right now on Destination Linux. So, in this week's community feedback, we're skipping the community feedback because we are going to talk about Michael's trip to my house to Texas. And Michael, you took a long flight.
I did.
Over from.
It wasn't that long. It was
Yeah,
okay.
I mean,
I got a bunch of
long.
delays though.
You traversed the whole universe to come and see me in Texas, or half of the United States, which is
maybe like a third or quarter of it. Maybe, I guess.
Yeah. So we spent the week doing all kinds, seeing all of the many offerings of Texas in there, and by that I mean I pretty much took you to the gym. And then we went back home and worked more.
All of the offerings of Texas that he knows of.
Yes.
Which is the gym. And
Yeah, like a few things and mostly the gym. And
Now,
which, by the way, my arm still hurt, by the way, for everybody who wants to know.
Aw.
So I do have to compliment Michael here. I have a very intense 90-minute routine every single day, and it's 90 minutes on a specific muscle group. And I will say that Michael was able to keep up the entire time in those workouts and did an amazing job, which was very impressive. Although the moment he would walk in the door, he would complain, go run to my wife and complain about the torture that he just went through. So it was like,
I don't see the problem here.
it was good, but it was also funny to see that. But I also took you.
She would say, "How's the gym?" And I'd be like, "Well, Ryan tortured me." Like that's how it was.
Aw.
Yeah.
But Ryan, actually, you took Michael to somewhere quite special that I knew about beforehand.
Yes. So Michael said he'd never been to the Rainforest Cafe and wanted to go. Now, I'm sure these animatronics that they have in the Rainforest Cafe run on Linux. They pretty much do. The robotics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was very Linux-y trip because of that. And so I took Michael to Rainforest Cafe, which, of course, if you know anything about Rainforest Cafe, is actually mostly for kids.
Right.
And Michael loved it. He loved every second of it. And
also Ryan was scared by all the animatronics and the storm that happened.
That's not true. That
the volcano going
I have a
off.
video of that. You're being scared, Ryan.
You jerk. How dare you how dare you hack my personal video and utilize that in the show.
The interesting thing about the Rainforest Cafe is that I didn't even know it existed until about a few months ago. And I saw this video about going to all the different ones, and then I thought, oh, well, I'm curious what this is. And it basically like a Chuck E. Cheese, but with like a forest animal theme. And it's interesting. It's fun, and I wanted to do it at least once, ever.
Yeah.
A fun restaurant. Did you guys enjoy hearing the volcano go off which led to the extinction of the dinosaurs? So, some of the Rainforest cafes I've been to have that.
We didn't have that. We just
didn't
had
have
like this storm that hit every 20 minutes, and we were right next to the gorilla, and the gorilla goes crazy. Like
He goes ape.
It goes ape. Yeah, it's funny because every Rainforest Cafe I've been to 5 different ones, and everyone is a little bit different. There are some differences. Like one I went to was the elephants were stampeding.
Yeah. Now the food is complete garbage and overpriced.
Yeah.
It's like microwave shrimp.
It's definitely overpriced.
It's just
it's mediocre.
It's just average. Yeah.
But the ambiance. Look at that fancy word, expensive word I just used there. The ambiance was so great, Yeah, it was fun. But we did a lot of businessy stuff. And of course, as is tradition, for those who've been listening to the show for a long time, I always force Michael to watch a terrible movie, in which this time it was The Lazarus Effect,
which is bad.
We were watching and it was getting really late. So I was like, well, I'll finish it, tomorrow or something like that. And then I came back in the room and Michael had turned it off. It was so bad. The moment I left the room, He just shut it off.
Yeah, I don't have to deal with it anymore. So it was, and he came in and said, "Hey, what happened?" I was like, "Oh, it was terrible. I turned it off." That's what happened in the movie. Not to say that people who like that movie, it's bad. It's just, it's okay. It's bad.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good.
Yeah, the
Well, it's a very
really
predictable movie. It's somebody who creates a serum that allows you to bring back people from the dead, and shocking.
Don't give away the plot.
Shocking that becomes a horror movie, and you can imagine why. And
So good.
Duh.
So good. Amazing. But some of the cool businessy stuff, because you weren't there for fun, although we had so much fun with the Tex-Mex. And of course, we had to try Texas barbecue. So I took them to an Asian restaurant the very first day. And
that's what happened.
And we had no Texas barbecue the entire time.
Exactly. We didn't have any Texas barbecue, which is, of course, going to be commented by some people who consider that a travesty of visiting Texas and not having barbecue. But it happens. Next time. When Ryan is the one controlling the navigation, it happens.
I go where I know. That's it. Yeah. Otherwise, we'd be lost. So we did make a businessy order while we were there, a business order for 2 Pixel 6 Pro phones for a very specific project that we decided to do. We've gotten some interesting feedback recently on some of the discussions about Apple and Android and all of that. A lot of people talking about, man, you got to check out GraphineOS and see this Android alternative in action. So we are doing just that. We ordered 2 Google 6 Pros. I've received mine already. I think Michael's is still on the way. Or if it's Michael, it's going to be left in the box for 3 weeks anyways.
I mean, you're not wrong.
But I started this process of configuring and getting the phone ready, which I'll do some videos on my channel about. Getting the phone ready for GraphineOS install. And one of the things, of course, you got to go into developer mode. And then they want you to have an OEM unlocked device that'll work with any carrier. And there's this particular setting in developer settings called OEM unlock. And so I thought I would get prepared all the way up to getting ready to install, which when I would start filming. And then realized in the instructions, it's like, no, you've got to have this OEM unlock enabled first before you can do this GraphineOS install. And to do that, you have to have a SIM card in the device. And I had some old Ting SIM cards that I'd ordered like years and years and years ago. And so I got one of those out, put it in the phone, and they expired in 2020. So now I had to order another Ting. So news to you, Michael, you might want to go ahead and place your order for a SIM card ahead of time because you need it to kind of prep your phone for that.
It expired. That's interesting.
But the other thing I saw in the instructions that was really interesting is that it specifically says do not use, because they have a web browser installer. So if you're not comfortable with the CLI, which I think is really cool, you can go through the web browser to do the install of GraphineOS. But do not use Snap or Flatpak versions. They both have apparently known bugs and issues when you're doing the GraphineOS install. And so this created an interesting problem because I have Ubuntu installed and I have Fedora installed on my main machine, but both of those I'm using Flatpak and Snap versions. And Ubuntu, it kind of raised the question, it's been so long since I've played with it for a long time, is there actually an alternative there in the repos for a non-Snap version of Firefox? I don't think there is in the repos. It's
not in the repos. I think it's available in other distros you can pull in with a PPA, but I don't think it's by default there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was telling Ryan that I'm just in the habit of downloading the tar.gz on the Mozilla website.
That is an option,
yeah.
Downloading the tarball does solve that too.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting problem with the Snap and Flatpak. I could see Snap potentially. I'm not sure why the Flatpak is having an issue, but just keep that in mind if you want to follow along with this challenge with us, and we'll be doing updates on the show and talking about it, of course, and doing videos on our own channels of it. But for those of you who've been wanting us for a long time to try out GraphineOS, we're about to do it. We're going to do it. No. Texas made us do it. We didn't get barbecue, but we got Pixel phones. And the reason we chose Pixel, by the way, is that's the recommended phone from GraphineOS. They recommend Pixels are the easiest to basically convert over to GraphineOS. So there you go.
And speaking of recommendations, something I recommend is Linode. Visit linode.com/tux. That's linode.com/TUX. And see why over 1 million developers trust Linode for their infrastructure. From their award-winning support offered 24/7, 365 to every level of user, to the ease of use and setup, it's clear why developers and businesses have been using and trusting Linode for projects both big and small since 2003. Linode offers the industry's best price performance value with all compute instances, whether that's shared, dedicated, high memory, and GPUs. Linode makes cloud computing simple, affordable, and accessible, allowing you to focus on your customers and not your infrastructure. So visit linode.com/tux. That's linode.com/TUX and create your account. And as a member of the Destination Linux community, you'll get a $100 60-day free credit when you become a member of the Destination Linode community. So maybe you just want to try out something new. Maybe you want to mess around with some projects that you've heard of and you never tried before. Well, Linode's simple, affordable, and accessible cloud solutions makes it super easy, makes this a breeze. In fact, you can use it to build nodes where everything you do yourself, or you can use their one-click apps from their app marketplace to do everything from Plesk and WordPress to Valheim and Minecraft servers. So go again right now. Get started at Linode's awesome cloud platform by going to linode.com/TUX.
Now, one of the other things, Michael, while you were here, I suggested and you shot down, and now I'm going to use the community to pressure you, is we were at the mall, and when we went to the mall, because the Rainforest Cafe was in the mall, there was a store that had CDs. CDs, for those who don't know, are compact discs that utilize lasers to inscribe music and data onto them. They're storage devices.
What?
Yeah, exactly. And so I told Michael, I said, you know what we should do? Let's spin up a music server, because me and him have such wide palettes when it comes to music. And then we'll put our music on a Linode instance, and we would just have it to share between like friends. Like Jill, we'd invite you because obviously you go, and we'd put our music there and just burn it on. And then Michael's like,
audio music server or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then Michael said, no, I could just easily do this in Spotify with a playlist or something. Why would we do that? Because we would have another excuse to have another server, Michael. That's why. Thank you, Jill. Jill gets it.
Okay, let me clarify my position on this topic, since Ryan is bringing it up to everyone on the show for some reason.
Pressure.
If you do everything about this server, Ryan, then I'm on board.
Yes.
Oh.
I knew it. Community pressure.
As long as I don't have to do anything, I'm good with it.
Well, I'm going to pass it on to Jill to administer, because I don't want to do anything with it either. But
well, the other advantage to having a Linode server with all your music on is that you can create actually an audio stream out of all the tracks.
That's right.
Just for us to use, our own personal radio station.
Yeah, Ryan, you should go ahead and make that.
So, of course, we could get sued, so we can't share it with everyone because the music industry is, well, what it is.
Yeah.
But I think it would be fun to have all of our, music tastes and things represented on a server. And I've gotten into this idea. Don't laugh at me, Michael. Stop laughing, Michael.
Why would I laugh at something you haven't said yet?
I know you're going to laugh. That's why. All right. Okay. Contain it, all right? I want to start collecting the CDs again, and then dang it, Michael. So I want to collect CDs again. Like, I miss it.
I have too many. You can have some of mine. I have over 1,000 in my collection, and my husband has another.
Of course you do, Jill.
Few thousand. Yeah.
How
I was
many
a radio DJ for 16 years.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have over 1,000 records and several thousand cassettes, literally in this.
Ryan, you are slacking. You are so slacking.
I've got like 4 or 5 CDs left over from back when I collected them. So I
actually found a box in my last move that had a bunch of my CDs. I don't think they work, but I have a bunch of them in there.
Yeah.
Because I learned, like people who transition from the jewel cases. For those who don't know, this is back in the day when you actually had to have a packaging for an individual CD that had only like 12 songs. Good old days.
You had to listen to the whole album,
Yeah, exactly.
Or you should.
Otherwise, you'd be wasting money.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're also paying more than $1 per song for sure. But what I found was there's these packs that back in the day was like a really good solution where you'd have this case of 40 or 50 CDs you could put in. And then after a long period of time, I found one of those in one of the boxes, and the sleeves that the CDs go into are falling apart.
Yeah.
It is the worst. It was the worst solution after a while. So it worked, but it's not great. So when I pull out a CD, the whole thing disintegrates.
The trick there is what I used to have to buy were special ones that were acid-free, and they would last a lot longer, and those have been just fine.
I didn't even know that was a thing to worry about.
See, if you get back into CD collecting with me, Michael, then you won't have to. You'll get to learn all of these new things that are.
I would happily get back into collecting the CDs I already have and adding no more to the collection.
Yeah.
But you have to physically own the media for us to put it on the server legally, because we're all about legal.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just buy it online, and you can download the MP3 and just put it on there.
There you go. Okay.
That way, I can skip the process of burning the CDs. It's still,
But we want the WAV uncompressed files. But anyways, I've taken us completely off track. Yeah. This is very important for me to use the community to pressure Michael into doing what I want. But what we're here to talk about actually is some stuff going on with Wayland. So when I saw some news going on about some different distros talking about the fact they're going to be enforcing Wayland, I started to think about this cycle that I've noticed in the, 6 years I've been in Linux that kind of happens. This new thing gets announced at some point. Sometimes it's like 15 years ago it gets announced, or recently gets announced. And then the new thing isn't really better than the old thing yet. And then some companies decide kind of, hey, we need to make a change. We're going to go ahead and adopt this new thing that's not better than the old thing right away. And then people get mad. And then companies reply with, well, if we don't adopt it, then it's never going to get to the point where it's actually better than the old thing. And the new thing either becomes then the old thing at some point, or the fight gets so ugly that the new thing dies this inglorious death. Hopefully, if you draw that out, you'll kind of see the whole circle of life of a Linux project. But
the circle of life.
The key is that Linux doesn't like change. People in Linux don't like change. The community doesn't like change. Like you can argue with me all you want, but you'd be wrong. And in 6 years of being in Linux, that has become extraordinarily clear. Like there's a lot of, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Or even if it's broke, it's not broke enough to spend time to fix it. And I think some of that comes from the fact that we have limited resources ultimately in Linux and open source that are capable of doing certain things. That's my thought on it.
I mean, there's examples that fit perfectly within this life cycle that you've described, because Systemd is one of those examples where when it first came out, people were losing their minds on it because it was supposedly changing things. Well, also that too. But they were supposedly changing things to make everything worse or whatever. And people who use it now recognize that it is better, and it was better for a long time, but people just didn't give it a chance. And then there's also the case of Pulse Audio. Pulse Audio is now the standard, and people kind of look at it and go, hey, that's great. We have something that works well. But when it first came out, it was not received very well. It was a lot of hate and vitriol towards it and stuff like that, which it ultimately was a better solution than the previous thing. And the similar thing happened with Pipewire with Pulse. So like everybody's, well, we already got Pulse, why we need Pipewire? Like, there are things that you can do to improve the experience. And just because there's something new doesn't mean it's going to be a bad thing. But I think you are right. A lot of people don't like change.
Yeah. And, reminds me of the recent Pseudo Show episode, which is brilliant. You should all go check out this episode. They have this amazing discussion about IDEs and things that I didn't even think about going on with IDEs, and some of the issues in the Linux ecosystem with IDEs, which was something, by the way, that I thought kind of Linux was like, hey, we're good with IDEs. We've got so many choices, proprietary, unproprietary, and all this stuff, to come to realize after listening to that discussion, there are some gaps there. And that's kind of what happens is, I think some of the individuals who get used to using things like Pulse Audio, for instance, go, well, it works for everything I have. But then they're kind of not realizing that there's this other half of the community, like pro audio engineers and things like that, or even semi-pro people who utilize equipment that works horrifically with Pulse Audio. So I see right now, we're going to talk about Pulse Audio later in the show, but focusing on Wayland and Xorg, that's kind of happening right now with these two. I think it's important to kind of set the stage, because we have a lot of new listeners and stuff, of why and what Wayland and Xorg are. So Wayland and Xorg are both display server protocols that allow applications to basically display windows. It's a very important part of the operating system. Imagine not being able to display anything. that would be the alternative kind of without it. Xorg is free and open source implementation of the X Windows system. However, it's very old. It's basically a Frankenstein disaster of code to maintain at this point. And that's not exact words, but pretty close to what the folks who are working on Xorg will describe it as well. And it's also has some security issues because it was a very old system designed for a very different time frame. And now today, we basically, to keep it running and keep it current, are tacking on all kinds of extensions like xrender, xrender, composite, all of these things that we're tacking on just to keep it kind of modern. But then there's all of these pieces of old code that either the folks who originally built it aren't around anymore to support it, and or it would take so much time to reverse engineer it that it would be a disaster. So they just kind of wait for things to break and patch. As I understand it, that's kind of how it works right now. So to me, it's no question of, do we need a new option in the Linux ecosystem? It's like we have to have one.
Yeah, developers actually have spent years, working around Xorg's bugs and issues and basically creating Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids to get stuff done. So it's time for something new. Right.
And so then I started thinking about my journey in Linux and thinking about some of the issues, which when we talk about POS audio, I could tell you stories there too. But when I do videos and things, when I talk about new GPUs, I talk about different settings or monitors and things, I always get the comments, how do you get rid of screen tearing? To the point where I did a whole dedicated video on how to get rid of screen tearing with NVIDIA, for instance. People talking about multi-monitor support issues. We see this a lot in the new code for different desktop environments and things about adding in better support for multi-monitor, and then the multi-monitor refresh rate issues. So if you have two monitors, one's 144 hertz and one's 60 hertz, this has created lots of problems over the years for desktops and things to support. And you can't help but know that a lot of that stuff, pieces of it at the very least, are tied back to this very old display server technology that we're forced to utilize. And this creates a really bad experience. I remember specifically trying to show off how before all of this awesome work with code weavers and Wine and Steam came about, how Linux could run these AAA titles on the latest and greatest hardware. And when I was recording, I was so stuck in the moment of talking about what I was doing that when I was done recording, the video was just like, there were like screen tears just flowing through the video that I had recorded the whole time. And so I didn't realize it at the time until after I posted the video, and then people were making comments like, oh yeah, Linux does fantastic with gaming. But these type of display server issues were kind of always existent. And then you would have to go and do things like turn off compositors and other stuff to try to get things to look right.
Yeah. And also in that case, it was just more of like the combination of gaming and recording created the bottleneck issue.
Exactly. Yep. So in comes Wayland. Wayland is not a fork and it's not an X server, but it does reuse some of the existing drivers and infrastructure where it makes sense. And so I kind of call it the Bride of Frankenstein.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Sure, why not?
I thought so. Its goal is to be easier to develop and maintain protocol or language than X11. So everyone should be totally on board and happy with this, right?
Of course. There is no chance that this would ever create any sort of drama or conflict or anything like that,
Good. All right, then it's settled. I guess there's nothing more to say.
Well, we're done with the show. Thanks for watching, everybody.
People should love this. Right, Jill?
Yeah. Well, the Wayland display server project actually was created by Red Hat developer Christian Hogsberg back in 2008. So it's been a while since we've had adoption, widespread adoption of Wayland. It's not quite here yet.
So this is a fair point, and a lot of people make this point who are kind of anti-Wayland train, that they're concerned that this project has been going on for so long. And honestly, it's been just the last few years that we've really seen big progress on a lot of the known bugs that have been happening with Wayland. Like a lot of the features, even just screen captures and things like that, weren't even options. So I think it's a fair critique. And then GNOME adopted Wayland by default. And I I have to believe that this forced adoption to try to move Linux forward helps the case for things like Wayland. It helps push it forward so that more developers put their attention into it, likely more bug reports get opened, more use cases get covered. Because if they never do that, if nobody adopts Wayland, it's never going to get to the point where we need it to be. I feel
that's true. It's an interesting situation because it's a chicken or the egg problem. Like, do you adopt it before when it's ready, or do you adopt it and try to help make it ready? And the GNOME team decided to do that. And KDE has now decided to do that as well, to adopt it and try to help make it ready. And GNOME did it very early on. So there was a lot of issues with Wayland in terms of people's perception because of their experience with GNOME doing it kind of too early. Because you could argue that, they needed to do it in order to push it forward. But also, when they did it, there was probably about a year or so where the experience was not very good. And people would complain about it and just kind of abandon GNOME. And then they decided to, continue forward and keep pressing on the making Wayland better. And now Wayland's at a state where, on GNOME specifically, that it's a very good experience in many instances. There's sometimes you'll run into a thing where you need to switch back, but most of the time, probably about 85, 90% of the applications and the stuff you want to do will work just fine on Wayland. And in fact, in a lot of those cases, will work better in Wayland.
Well, do you think that some of the critiques, though, that have happened, because I would put myself in there as somebody who was not been happy with Wayland up until recently. Now, honestly, I install a distro, and half the time I find out I've been in Wayland the whole time, and I'm like, oh, I've been in Wayland.
Well, the only time you find out you're in Wayland is because an application you want to run doesn't work. Yeah. So you notice it then. And that's the same kind of thing for me. So I've been using Wayland here and there for testing purposes. But it's always something I can't use as like a main thing because there are certain applications that I use every day that don't work on Wayland. And that is partly the fault of the application as well as just being a new display server protocol. But the chicken or the egg is like, who do you go to fix this? Do you go to Wayland to fix it, or do you go to the application developer? And if it's the application developer, what if they don't have time to work on Wayland support and things like that? So we're in a situation where this transition period is going to take a while. I mean, it's still going to take quite a while now, and it's already been about 15 years, but it's probably going to be a little more to do that as well. But there has been a lot of projects that are putting in effort, like GNOME has been for years, and KDE has been for quite a few releases. And with the announcement of the Plasma 6 goal of having it exclusively Wayland, or at least Wayland by default, eventually exclusively, the effort putting into Wayland support is going to improve quite a bit, and hopefully that will also improve the overall experience.
But let's talk about the fact that Wayland doesn't really it has a reference protocol for a compositor.
Okay. I've been a little bit positive in terms of Wayland, but for a long time I've had this really annoying thing that has always bothered me about Wayland. And it's maybe just a personal thing, maybe it's not, I don't know, but it annoys me. And that's the lack of compositor that was made by the Wayland team. So the Wayland made a protocol for the display server, but they didn't make a compositor for usage across other DEs and things like that. They did make a reference compositor, which basically means don't use this. You can take the ideas that we did in this and then make it yourself. And that kind of annoys me because of the fact that the work that is done in GNOME, which has been very well done, they've put a lot of effort into it, and it is mostly locked into Mutter. Because there's some things that you can put into Wayland, and there's some things that other teams can use as a way to pull into their own. But for the most part, there's a lot of stuff that is just going to be for GNOME or things based on Mutter. And that is kind of irritating because it means that we're fragmenting a very core component. And you could argue that this is a way to make it so that it can be optimized for the desktop environments, and that is good. But the progress is kind of slow because every team that is working on the implementation of a compositor in their desktop environment are doing it independently. At least not every team. There are projects that are meant to be like a universal thing, like WL Roots and Mir. They're both meant to be universal compositors for any DE, and some projects are using those as their basis for the compositing. But it's just something that I felt like it's been a missed opportunity to have faster growth, to have a compositor that other DEs can use rather than having to build from scratch or at least build into their own system.
So right now, as far as Wayland compositors go, there's Sway, which is the tiling Wayland compositor. There's Kwin, there's GNOME Shell, Mutter, and then Weston is the reference. I'm sure there's there's Mir, you mentioned, and some others out there. So there's quite a few options, right? But you're saying these are very specific to those desktop environments.
Sway and WL Roots are kind of like universal, and Mir is also a universal thing, so that other DEs can take it and put it into it. Like, for example, Mate has talked about doing that, and Alex Qt can take in Kwin and stuff like that. So there is a somewhat of a sharing. But the biggest issue I've had is that it wasn't like a starting point. The Weston was always meant to be a reference compositor. And that's fine. I just wish they would make a compositor that would be viable. Because a reference compositor means it's just not really usable. It's more of like, here's what you could do to implement it in your DE. And if they had a universal one that was meant for everybody to use, and then the DEs decided to make their own implementations on top of that, then that would be great. But at the moment, it seems like that's a necessity instead of an option.
I think it's a fair point, but I kind of appreciate the fact that they have fragmented this. At least let me say it, that I can see the vision here, because the problem with X is that it got so overloaded with code from everyone's needs and patches and extensions that it became a Frankenstein of code that was impossible after decades to really properly be able to rework. And if you're keeping this kind of broken out into chunks, this makes it a lot easier, it would seem like, to keep Wayland up to date while putting some of the other development work kind of on the DEs. I'm sure the DEs aren't thrilled about that, and that's why it's taken so long to adopt. But at the end of the day, they'll probably be able to do some much more creative things with it. But do you think this will kill some desktop environments because of this change? And
I think it will, but
are we sad about that, or is that a good thing because we need less options, perhaps?
That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point.
Jill's
going to be disappointed that Window Maker might be going away at that point.
Yeah, but X Wayland hopefully will support those. There are some protocols being developed that will support the old X Window managers.
I mean, at some point, the idea of like X Wayland being deprecated is going to happen too, right?
Yeah,
there's going to be some point in time where this stuff is not going to be managed anymore, just because of like they're going to have the same situation of all this old code that they don't want to
get. They want to get rid of it.
Well, let's explain what X Wayland is to people who are still trying to decompile this conversation that we're having here, because this is kind of a very specific, intricate part of Linux, right? That is very important, but not that everybody thinks about. So X Wayland is basically just an X server compatibility layer on top of Wayland that allows you to run X applications and things like that in Wayland and communicate with that protocol. So
nice middle ground.
It's kind of a hybrid option there, so that you can get some of the stuff working where it needs to be. And it's been very effective. I think X Wayland has helped exponentially, I think, with the adoption.
I see what you did there.
That was
X Wayland helped exponentially.
X.org.
I didn't mean to do that, but I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it. Yes, I'm going to take that as a win. So, Jill, what do you think of the Wayland adoption? There's still issues with Wayland.
Oh, absolutely. Like some apps having issues. Yeah. Like I know, like for me, I use the app called Barrier. It's a virtual KVM to share your keyboard and mouse among several computers over the network. And that has issues with Wayland, and I know a lot of admins use it. So there are certain pieces of software that have to be converted over to Wayland for other people to adopt it. So that's understandable, but it's getting much better. And I think one of the reasons for the slowdown to Wayland adoption is that there are just so many other very important projects that developers are focusing on right now, especially like in the Linux graphics space, such as with Wine, Vulkan, and DXVK. Those are the big, the hot things right now to focus on. And I think some of the development has been taken away from Wayland to work on those projects. And a lot of progress in Wayland has been done, and there's been an awesome push for gaming on Linux with Wayland, such as for gaming with GameScope on the Steam Deck and our desktops, Wine on Wayland, and wow, yeah, even now we have NVIDIA driver support since 2021 for Wayland. It still has issues, but we do have support now.
I think that's one of the reasons why Wayland is taking so long, is because NVIDIA has been taking as long as they possibly could to be like there's a notorious video out there where Linus has some choice words for NVIDIA. And the reason is because NVIDIA has spent a lot of time fighting the Linux community. And they did so with Wayland as well, because not that they were anti-Wayland, but they were disagreeing on how Wayland support would be implemented on their hardware. So they spent years trying to push this one thing that would allow them to have proprietary control and all this other stuff that the Wayland team and the GNOME team and the KDE team refused to implement, creating a bottleneck. And then eventually NVIDIA decided to finally give in, but that was over 10 years of fighting NVIDIA to get them to finally do it. So I think part of the reason that Wayland has taken so long is because NVIDIA, for all of that time up until 2021, you could not use Wayland on NVIDIA at all. People would just say, don't even bother, it's not going to work. And now we're in a, beginning stage of support for Wayland on NVIDIA. And that is a good thing to happen, but it did take a while, and that might be one of the reasons why people were wondering why is it taking so long, is because there was a huge bottleneck of a company trying to fight it. And
gee golly, NVIDIA, thanks a lot.
Gee golly. Golly gee, NVIDIA. And it's also not necessarily just NVIDIA, but they were a giant roadblock for sure.
So you've got a kind of a company causing a little bit of a roadblock, a major graphics company.
A little bit of a roadblock. It wasn't like they put a speed bump. It was more like they built a giant wall in the middle of the freeway and then eventually decided like, okay, we'll take this brick off here and maybe this brick too. Okay, maybe this one. Like, okay, fine, we'll take it down. But that was a 10-year process.
Yeah. Another thing I want to mention, the display server, me and Michael and Ryan have been talking about this. The display server is such a huge thing to replace. It's one of the reasons why Microsoft Windows, Microsoft has not done a replacement with Windows on its back end because it's such a huge project.
Well, why would you need to? It's so gorgeous now that they've moved the start button to the middle. I mean,
I know.
Exactly. You get it, Ryan. You get it.
Yeah.
But it's so huge. I mean, Xorg, was used in Unix. I mean, it's been around for a long time.
It's been a minute. Yeah. And it's not aging like a fine wine. It's aging like a vinegar or something.
Well, it's also, let's talk about the idea of Wayland versus Xorg, because there's two things that I wanted to mention. First of all, this debate is not really worth having because it's not a choice between are we going to go Wayland or are we going to keep Xorg. The choice has already been made for us by the developers. Wayland is coming. Like, it is going to take over. There is no question. So whether you jump on board or stay behind because your applications don't support it, it doesn't make a difference between whether or not Wayland is going to become the main standard adopted display server protocol. That is happening. The other thing is that a lot of people think that there is even a battle between the two, but there's not really, because the Xorg Foundation are working on Wayland. So they recognize that this needs to be replaced too.
Wait a minute. They're in bed with the enemies? Girl.
No, they're working together.
They're in cahoots?
Yeah.
This is madness. So they're working on that project, which I think is a really important point you made there, Michael. So what we feel about it, it's basically, it's time to embrace it. And I think everybody should do their part in testing it, even if it's because you have an application or some other equipment or things that don't allow you to utilize it. Keep trying it and then open those bug reports and kind of be a part of the solution here, because Wayland is coming. So we need to support it. Now, there is one application we're going to talk about here that everyone immediately, it didn't go through the typical open source Linux kind of life cycle. Everyone immediately adopted it because it's the best solution out there, and that's Bitwarden. This episode of Destination Linux is brought to you by Bitwarden. Get started right now with your free account at bitwarden.com/tux. That's /TUX. A password manager software allows you to have peace of mind knowing your online accounts are secure. Bitwarden provides you the tools to store all your passwords in a secured vault, auto-generate those passwords and usernames for you, and even automatically fill them in so you don't have to. You can access your data across many types of devices like your web browser, mobile apps, desktop applications, even the command line. Bitwarden seals and encrypts your private data with end-to-end encryption before it ever leaves your device, so you know you're the only one with access to your data. So go to bitwarden.com/tux to get started. You can get started for free, but you probably just want to go ahead and sign up for that premium account because it's literally just $10 per year. And you're going to get a gigabyte of encrypted file storage, 2-step login with YubiKey, U2F, and Duo, Vault Health reports, Bitwarden Authenticator with TOTP. That is that time passwords, the one-time passwords that you do that you can set up in Bitwarden. Michael, there was someone else we were talking to recently who said, we were giving the example and they go, I didn't know Bitwarden could do that either.
Yeah, we were talking about how we talked about on this show that there, as a tip of the week, that people didn't know that this was a thing, and we've given an example, and their reaction was, oh, what, really? It can do that?
It was kind of hilarious. So utilize the TOTP. It's awesome in there. And basically when it comes up and says use an authenticator or whatnot, and it gives you the little code, you can pop that into Bitwarden. There's a little box for it if you have the premium account. And now you have that one-time password that you can utilize across your sites as well. You get all this for just $1 per month. Go to bitwarden.com/TUX to get started. Thanks to Bitwarden for sponsoring this episode of Destination Linux.
Earlier in the show, we talked about Pulse Audio and Pipewire. So let's go back in time with Linux for a moment and discuss some of the things of why Pipewire became a thing and the issues that we'd have back in the day with audio. Because having to launch ALSA, for example, from the terminal to try and unmute and turn on or off a sound device, that was a thing we used to have to do. Also, constantly having to run a Pulse Audio kill command because applications were unable to grab the audio stream, or the stream crossed in some weird way of like the different streams creating artifacts and echoes between the applications, and you have to reset everything, and then or having to go through the painful process of installing Jack to replace Pulse Audio. And for those who have never used this before, Jack is a very, very powerful, awesome audio connection kit that is incredibly painful to set up. Unless you're using the app, the distro specifically made for doing Jack, because then they just do it for you, which is fantastic. Those exist, but for anyone who wanted to do it themselves, it wasn't easy. And now we have Pulse Audio has been a very nice thing for us as Linux users for many years. But working with Pulse Audio to set up new loops and make changes and configurations and stuff like that, and you get this great idea that you have, and you tweak it, you spend a whole day making everything work, and you finally get it working, you're super happy, that you turn your computer off, the next day you turn it back on, and it's all gone. Because it doesn't save anything by default in Pulse Audio. So it was a little bit annoying back in the day. So the reason why we're talking about all of these things is that Pipewire now exists and eliminates a ton of things that were headaches, has added a ton of new features, and they have a new release this week that we're going to be talking about with Pipewire 0.3.71, which contains some pretty exciting enhancements. The biggest of which...
Woo-hoo.
No, you're not allowed to get into the exciting part first.
I get to tell everybody what this is because I didn't know about it until Ryan told me what it was.
No, the reason why I wanted to stop you is because I want to talk for a minute about this Pulse Audio discussion, because we have talked about Pipewire before, and people have said in comments, I use Pulse Audio and it's fantastic. I don't see any need for Pipewire.
Yeah, why fix what's not broken type of thing.
So I agree. This is another situation that we run into in the Linux lifecycle. It's a perfect example of what we talked about before, whereas if it works for you, then it must work for everybody else. Unfortunately, is not the world of PCs, which is why we've invented things like Docker and other stuff to try to make that more of a reality. But all these PCs being different and all people's use cases and needs being different. For instance, I have a script on my GitHub page. And the whole idea behind the script was to figure out how to get the Scarlett 2i2 to work properly in Pulse Audio. Now, if you just plug in the Scarlett 2i2, it works. It will recognize it. You can listen to audio through it. You can even do some recordings. However, if you do some of the fancier things that we do, for instance, having to capture multiple audio streams at once, what happens is it creates these artifacts of echoing. And that echoing actually goes into the actual recordings itself. So even if you can deal with it in monitoring, the people listening are going to be really annoyed. and other artifacts. So I created a script that basically allows it to grab 2 different audio streams with Pulse Audio without creating these conflicts. And these are the things that I had to figure out and do, not being an audio engineer and not being a developer, that I had to figure out back to be able to use pro audio equipment. Very, very annoying process. Additionally, Michael and I spent days trying to figure out how to properly pipe audio in from our listeners in another application.
Days. He means total amount of time we spent trying to figure this out. Accumulated into days, but over the course of probably 2 or 3 weeks trying to figure this out, because it was a lot. And especially when there's all these tutorials of how to do mix minus, and they're worthless, and they talk about one mix but not to bring back the other stuff, and like, we want to do more than just this. Yeah. And you know, it was interesting.
They mostly deal with callers, people who call in. You have them on your phone, you bring them into your recorder, you mix minus their audio out. Yes, that's easy. What we're trying to do is bring dozens of people into a room all at once and have our audio and video feeding to them and all of these things. Well, Pipewire does this so easily. It takes me seconds every day to just open QP Graph and just QWP Graph and just make these links. And so once we had Pipewire, that type of thing was solved. So this is the kind of point I wanted to make, is that this is why things like Pipewire are so important, because from a professional audio community standpoint, Pulse Audio doesn't cut it anymore. And so, yes, it may work for you, just listening to headphones and YouTube videos and stuff like that. But when it comes to the pro audio, even semi-pro audio world, it falls on its face really bad. And thus, Pipewire's amazing. I love Pipewire.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Pipewire. I think that it has changed the game in a lot of ways and made it so easier for us to do what we're doing in terms of piping the audio and having our patrons involved and that sort of stuff, while still also having independent files and independent local recordings of everything, and being able to have like the separation, but also the combination. All that stuff is possible because Pipewire made it possible. So when it was first announced, I thought, oh, this sounds great. And I was kind of like making a joke about, okay, yeah, we'll see this in a few years. And then it came around very quickly. And I am so happy to see like all the distros are basically switching to Pipewire by default and providing these benefits to everyone. And with the news that's on this latest version, I think Jill is going to be very excited about one of the, probably the biggest one in terms of the latency.
Yeah. So in this version, a new 0 latency Jack D-Bus bridge was actually added. This works similar to what Pulse Audio has to offer and creates a sync source when Jack D-Bus is started. It is, however, much more efficient and actually runs the complete Pipewire graph as a synchronous Jack client with no added latency. And so in layman's term, this is very, very important. No added latency is actually a key for audio engineers to use real-time applications with Pipewire, such as using different applications to run different instruments and bring them together in Audacity. Yeah. So you need that real-time control. And up until now, Pipewire hasn't had that function. It would actually create a middleman in the audio stack, which actually would create latency in audio to be out of sync. So
this is a big deal. You're playing a guitar. You want your drummer to be in sync. You got your 2 machine. I am wearing a Janky shirt today. When you think about someone as pro as Ronald Janky sitting there with his keyboards and things that he's jamming on, latency latency become a really big deal. There, getting his instruments into his computer and creating all the effects and everything that he does there. So this is where, again, when we talked about Linux growing because of code weavers and Steam and all of this in the gaming and bringing all of these new people into Linux, audio is somewhere where Linux could absolutely dominate if we can really bring these professional options in, but at a level where people don't have to also become experts in the operating system in order to utilize them.
Yeah, yes. Exactly.
We've always had pro audio for years thanks to Jack, but setting that up required you to be not pro Linux user.
I've had to spend probably at least 100 hours setting up Jack, by installing a low latency kernel in Debian and installing Jack and adjusting the CPU governors, running scripts to get it just perfect.
Yeah.
It takes a while. And it's so nice because Pipewire does this for you.
Yeah, you mentioned the scripts for Jack, Jill. When I had to go to Jack at a certain point because Pulse Audio was failing out so much, Scrapjaw in our community created a script just for my machine. And it was a very long script that would basically kill Pulse Audio and then initiate at certain stages the various Jack applications and create these connections and things. I had no idea what the script did. It worked, but I had no idea what it did. But that's the point, is that it was too difficult. And now with Pipewire and these enhancements, we're taking something that's already fantastic for your average user and getting better. But now we're bringing in the professional features, which is awesome. Yeah. And then there's more improvements. Activation of remote nodes is more efficient. In their Jack Notify callback implementation has been reworked to emulate better what Jack does. And then more work on the BAP devices. So device latency is now passed on to applications for multi-device headsets and channel allocation, bunch of improvements and bug fixes. So I just want to take a moment, most of all, and just say thank you to the Pipewire team. Your work is awesome. I love your faces. I don't know what I would do without Pipewire. They could probably get rid of me off the show if it wasn't for my insane ability to link all of the audio from our patrons into this.
That's the only reason you're on the show right now.
They think I'm a miracle worker, but really I just drag a bunch of lines and it works. So that's it. Thanks for helping me keep my job.
Yeah, he's lucky for that. You did everything for him, Pipewire. But this is funny because I was thinking about it. You were saying about how easy it is to do certain things, and it made me think Pipewire now is how I felt going from like dial-up to broadband cable internet. Cool. I don't ever want to go back. And Pipewire is the exact same thing. When I would try another distribution and just for testing purposes or whatever, and it didn't have Pipewire, you could feel not having Pipewire. That's how much of an improvement it is.
Now, not that we didn't love Pulse Audio. It's just its time has come, because I remember you talking about, Michael and Jill, a time before Pulse Audio that was
OSS
really bad.
OSS, really ALSA, as when you only had ALSA. Like there was ALSA, it was great. Like, and also to be clear, for those who don't know, these things are still being used. So Pipewire is not like a replacement to Pulse Audio; it's a sitting on top of
layers.
Yeah, so it uses Pulse and Jack, so it's not like it's a total replacement. But what's cool about it is that it has drop-in support, so that's why I was able to be adopted so quickly. So everything that used Pulse or everything that used Jack could, in theory, just jump into Pipewire. And back in the day, before there was Pulse, there was ALSA, and ALSA was good, but it required you to be an audio expert, or really a Linux expert and an audio expert to use it. And it wasn't as powerful as Jack at the same time. So Jack at least justified all the effort, whereas ALSA just had some, like the labels of every device was confusing. You had to figure it out and do troubleshooting to figure out which device is which and all these sorts of things. And there would also be like multiple entries for the same device, even though there was no reason to have multiple entries. It was just that sort of experience. And then Pulse simplified that and made it much better, but it also had its own quirks. And Pipewire is simplifying that even more, adding in Jack stuff and just being awesome.
You couldn't figure that out in ALSA, Michael? You don't know Jack.
That's a good
one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, and
another dad joke, but this time on purpose.
That was awesome, Ryan. But something else I want to point out is that here at Destination Linux, we were one of the early adopters of Pipewire in our production. In fact, I think we were one of the very first video podcasts to use Pipewire in their production, let alone podcast in general.
As soon as I saw it, I was so desperate to find something else that it was an immediate, let's try it and see if we could get it working. And thankfully,
and that's a testament to it, because we adopted it very early and it worked very early.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jill, this week, Michael and I were together when I was writing the show, and I want to apologize to you for Michael picking this ridiculous game.
I did not pick this game. I laughed at him picking this game, and therefore he seems to think that sanctions my choice of saying good job.
You approved it, you know?
Like, I didn't say anything. I just laughed because this is a very silly, fun, insane game that does actually look kind of fun in a weird way.
Is quite silly, but fun. And it's one of the rare gems you won't be able to pass up. It's called Super Bunny Man.
I love it. Rare gem you won't be able to pass up. Super Bunny Man.
Have you ever dreamed of being part bunny and part superhero?
Well,
we all really have, especially Michael.
No, definitely not.
So now you can play out that dream in this game. And it's, a physics-based co-op platformer about a guy in a rabbit costume, essentially. And you team up with your friends, local or online, to beat levels and find hidden carrots and race against the clock. And it has over 3,000 very positive reviews. So how can you go wrong?
Right. Michael left 2,999 of those because his dream of being part bunny, part superhero was finally realized. Yeah, he created all those accounts. Just
to promote this game. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I had a wonderful time playing this charming game on my Steam Deck, even with just, playing in single player mode. I was sad I didn't have Michael and Ryan to play with.
We were really busy.
I know.
At the Rainforest Cafe.
You were. Yeah. And it is fun, it's really fun trying to use jelly physics. That's what you call these kind of games with their movement with the characters, or jelly physics. And you can
I thought that was just Ryan's understanding of physics.
Yeah. Yes. And getting lost.
I thought that was just Michael's arms after a workout. Jelly.
Oh, that's exactly what that is.
And it's really fun. Have your bunny move with cartwheels over obstacles to the wormholes, and it would be even funner playing with someone else.
That sentence made so much sense.
Yeah, and absolutely, this game is really meant for multiplayer, but I had fun playing it in single-player mode as well. And if you act fast, you may be able to grab Super Bunny Man on Steam for 25% off for only $11.24. But this sale ends really soon.
You better pick it up quick, Michael. You better get yourself...
Yeah.
Well, you
right
probably
after the show. Right after the show.
Yeah.
So this kind of reminds me, Super Bunny Man, when you said Michael would want to be a superhero and a bunny, it's more like Michael would want to be a superhero and a sloth together. Oh. And the reason I mention that is Michael spending time at my house, I realized how much of a sloth he's like. So let me give you an example. I'll be like, Michael, it's time to go to the gym. And he'll go, okay, give me 10 minutes. 45 minutes later or somewhere around there, Michael will finally get his creaking old bones up off the couch.
Here's the reality of what happened. He said, hey, we're going to leave for the gym in 30 minutes. I was like, okay, cool. He comes up to me in 10 minutes and says, hey, you ready to go? Like, it's not even been 15 minutes. What are you talking about? And he literally was debating how long it's been until his wife pointed out it's only been 10 minutes, Ryan.
Yeah. Oh.
He's very sloth-like, Jill. Don't listen to what he's saying.
He's impatient, is what we're seeing.
So we went, Michael, to do cartwheels like Super Bunny Man to the gym with
100%. Actually, I think what we should do is set up an obstacle course at scale, and then Ryan and I compete to who can be the most Super Bunny Man.
Yes.
I would win because it would take 45 minutes for Michael to actually decide.
No, because you
getting up from his chair.
You would ignore how long the time would take, so you just jump the line and cheat.
Maybe. I would probably. Anything to win. I don't like to lose. Speaking of not losing, our software spotlight is not going to leave you in last place because it comes from the community. Shut up, Michael. Don't laugh at it. This week's software spotlight is a recommendation. Shut your face, Michael. From a community member and our friend Shadowroy called Distrobox. So Distrobox is a tool that allows you to run any Linux distribution inside your terminal. It uses Podman or Docker. I can't believe Michael's still laughing. To create
it also
containers.
Uses jelly physics inside the containers.
Yes, it uses jelly physics.
Yes. It uses Podman or Docker to create containers that are tightly integrated to your host system. This means you could share your home directory, external storage, USB devices, and graphical applications with this container. It's a great way to try out different Linux distributions without having to install them on your system. And you can also run software that's not available in your distribution's repository. So this issue, for instance, with trying to get a Firefox option, let's say there wasn't this packaging that I could go grab off the tar file off of Mozilla. I could potentially grab it from another distro utilizing Distrobox. And one of the cool use cases Shadowroyd mentioned was they use Arch, like every pro should, but they don't always trust the AUR versions of software. So if the application is available in another distro repository, they install it using Distrobox, and boom, problem solved. So that's a really cool use case for people who are kind of worried about the AUR, don't have time to maybe go through the code of the packages they're installing, which you should do if you're downloading things from the AUR. It's awesome. I love the AUR, but it would be very easy to put malware and other things inside of that.
That's true. And anything where you have user generated or user submitted, it's definitely possible for that. But this is a really cool suggestion, and this is a really cool spotlight. And I have heard about this for a long time, and I've never actually used it, so I'm looking forward to trying that out. And another thing that is so good, thanks to Jelly Physics, is our tip of the week. And our tip of the week this week relates to time format conditions. So like Linux distros offer a ton of configuration options, and most of the time making changes is easy. But there's one thing that UX devs do or don't do, I guess, because they don't seem to be bothered by this esoteric syntax that's needed to change the date and time in your panel clocks and stuff like that.
I hate it so much.
For those who
so
are
bad.
Who, just to give you a quick idea of what we're talking about, when you go into edit your date and time on your panel, it'll say something like %lowercase b space %e comma space %l colon % capital M space %p. And you're like, what are we supposed to do with this? Like, how is this helpful? And which, of course, that means May 21st, 12 p.m., right? This is the thing that kind of creates a issue of what exactly are we trying to do here? Are we trying to learn a whole new syntax? Or are we just trying to change the date and time of our panel?
Just want to change the time. I don't want to learn this dumb syntax that has no other use case that I can think of anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
I need the developer to do it for me.
That's why our tip of the week is going to be the tip from Mike Buckby's website that you can go to called For a Good Striff Time. So for a good time, or I'm not even sure what the STRF means, but I just like to say striff. But so go for a good strifftime.com, which has an easy date and time format tool that does all the guesswork for you. No more looking up what these %A, %B, and all that means. You can just use this tool to build the format by clicking the pieces that you want, and then it outputs the format for you, and you just copy and paste those symbols into the panel clock system that, for some reason, still it requires you to use it.
Yes. We need to come up with something else. This is something that's outdated. After we're done with Wayland and Pipewire, can we fix this stupid syntax into something that makes sense? Like Markdown. We can make a Markdown version or something.
I mean, sure, we can make a Markdown. Or we could just also have a way to build it into the DE so you don't have to go and look up the research to find out what these symbols mean and stuff like that. Or maybe just have a link to this website that tells you how to do it.
Yeah, even
that
easier.
would be jelly. Yeah.
Gosh.
Be jelly.
Yes, I remember spending quite some time playing with dock apps and Window Maker to adjust the time with these settings. And I kind of learned it by heart finally. Doing that, and then creating scripts, and then a lot of our software.
Yeah, all the things you should have to do to change the time,
just so you can change the date and time, and not even change the information, just change the format of how it looks.
How does Linux get this reputation of being difficult? I don't get it.
I have no idea what you're referring to.
Yeah, exactly.
It's difficult. I thought it was super easy, barely an inconvenience.
Well,
a lot of people, their first time trying to adjust the time was on XFCE.
Yeah.
Because they were notorious for having to learn how to use these.
Somebody
code.
somewhere is going to write us a comment that tells us why it's so important that syntax exists still to this day.
Since you
not that it was
Yes.
important at some point. I know it was important at some point, but
Sure.
they're going to argue why it's still important today and it should never be changed. I'm waiting for the comment. I cannot wait to read it and laugh.
I know it's used in programming languages and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and that's fine. But that's not
Yeah.
the level of understanding this thing for programming languages versus just trying to change the format on your panel. I mean, it shouldn't be the same thing.
Right. It'd be like having to code every time to launch your application or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know I've been gelling like a felon this whole time. So a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening to Destination Linux. However you do it, we love your faces. And you can join us on Discord. Go to tuxdigital.com/Discord. And you can hang out with all of the various members of our community. And if you want to watch the show live, well, you need to become a patron. And you can watch the show live every Sunday.
What happened to this episode where you became the dad joke person?
I know.
just curious.
I'm
You
just
took
on
my
fire
role.
with this jelly. I've been on a jelly roll, man.
I'm actually getting jelly over this,
Yeah.
because you're doing it so well.
You getting a little jelly?
Little
For those who want, yes, for those who want to watch live, you can do that by becoming a patron, and that's just one of the awesome perks of becoming a patron. You get access to unedited versions of the show. You can also join us in the patron-only post show that happens every week after the show once we're done recording, and you can get this and many, many more, including other shows, because you're not becoming a patron of just DL. You're becoming a patron of the entire network. So go to tuxdigital.com/contribute to sign up. You can also go to tuxdigital.com/store to get some awesome swag. We have t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, coasters, stickers, hats, and so much more. So go to tuxdigital.com/store to get those.
And do bunny cartwheels and jelly physics. And check out all our amazing shows here on Tux Digital. We have the Pseudo Show, This Week in Linux, the DOS Geek Channel, Linux Out Loud, Hardware Addicts, and our virtual Linux user group, Linux Saloon, as well as our newest show, Fit and Fueled, to get your muscles in check.
Yes, and your nutrition in check.
Nutrition
too.
in check,
Yeah.
and to help you think better, to do code better and development, and do all the Linuxy things. And everyone head to tuxdigital.com and subscribe to all our wonderful shows. And don't forget to leave a rating on your favorite app so others can discover the power of open source and keep those penguins marching in the full Monty of Linux and open source awesome sauce.
You know, all of our shows just gel together so perfectly.
It just gels so well.
Yes.
It's
Everybody, have a
like
great
physics
week.
is involved or something.
And remember that the journey itself is
It's
just as important as
the jelly.
The destination, bunny rabbit.
The super bunny man.
What was that, Jill? You look like the rabbit on the Monty Python that attacks the soldiers right there. The teeth and you know,